And Michael Neville, how are you?
I'm well, thanks, Andrew.
Welcome to the show.
Pleasure.
Now, what we're going to be talking about today is looking at both local and international markets, but more importantly, looking at how farms work in Australia and how that impacts their capacity to sell both locally in Australia. But Australian agriculture is a net exporter, isn't it? It's not a net producer internally.
We've always been a net exporter.
Yeah. So, look, I thought I'd introduce Michael because we're going to have Michael back several occasions, but Michael was a farmer to start with. In the 1990s, got into corporate farming and has been involved in citrus, avocados, plums, cereal production up in the Murray Basin, doing work with salinated soil, use of technology, water use, then more recently carbon use and pasturing with cattle. You've done sort of all, haven't you, really?
And I've been around. I've been in agriculture for a while. Really enjoy it. There's a lot of challenges there.
Yeah.
And the challenges are getting bigger.
Yeah. So look, why I've got Michael along is for a whole lot of reasons. One, he's a great friend and he's articulate about what's happening in farming. Secondly, he's probably dealt with the most sophisticated farming in Australia for people, for super funds and the like, who demand a generational return on capital at a high level, but has also taken soils which were unusable in one level and created new wealth from those soils. He's also built markets directly from growing to markets and is now dealing throughout Asia and understanding the Asian market and that impact on Australia. So we really couldn't have anyone better than Michael to chat about what we're chatting about today. Now, Michael, you're a bit of a mud on the boots sort of guy. Can you tell me what that means?
Yeah, so when I first started in agriculture, my first job after leaving school, my first boss said, you've got to get out there and get mud on your boots. You've got to be involved. You've got to know what's going on the field, and you've got to know what's happening to your soils. As I've been in agriculture for a while now, soils is everything. So unless you understand your soils, you've got no way of getting return.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because winemakers for a long time called it terror. And, I'm a wine drinker and I can taste soils I can taste almost anything after all this drinking I've done. But I can definitely pick the limey soils of a Burgundy. I can do those sort of things. And you realize how critical the soil is in wine drinking to the flavor in the grape, the nourishment of the grape, the style of the grape. So it goes to every form of agriculture, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. And when we turn those soils around in the saline soils in the Lake Boga district, and we generated soils that were doing absolutely nothing and then turned them into tomatoes, as in tomato production, and you could see those soils improve the whole time. So as long as you look after the soils, it'll look after you.
It's interesting, isn't it, when you look at agriculture in the States, which has, topsoil of about 2 centimetres from the excessive use of fertiliser, and your method of deep agriculture where you get very strong topsoils which are very rich, it's a different mindset, isn't it?
Well, it's a different way of farming, and I think a lot of that was through row cropping. So we were creating the soils,
Yes,
and then putting drip irrigation through them and nutrients at the same time. But I think there's a lot of really good soils, deep soils in Australia, and there's a lot of rubbish soils too. So don't, even down in the southwest of Victoria, there's a lot of really washed out soils because of high rainfall zones.
yeah.
But they're good soils. They've got rainfall and they just need nutrients. It's knowing what to do with the soils you've got.
And building sustainability.
Yeah.
We're going to talk more about the future of farming, but one of the key sets at the beginning is to say, look, this farm is a farm for 25, 50, 100 years. What am I doing now to build the sustainability of farms? Because farms that are not sustainable are not profitable.
Yeah, that's right. Sustainability equals profitability. It has to be profitable, otherwise it just can't last.
Okay, well, look, part of the boots on the, soil on the boots, you getting out there, I think has taught you not just farming, but it's shown you a variety of opportunities about water use, about carbon offsets, about climate change and what has to be done. So I think let's sort of dig a bit deeper into each one of those subjects. So, Michael, since 1990, that's 30 years, you've seen a change in technology?
Oh, massive. So farms, when you talk about the modern farm, everything's got to be hooked in now. It's got to be connected. You've got to use satellite technology. you've got to use everything to make that farm work and be as efficient as you can.
It's amazing, isn't it? So in 2050, by 2050, it's going to be 9.7 billion people in the world, which is a 70% kick up in calorific use throughout the world. This isn't just an issue about financially successful farming. It's actually about a sustainable world, isn't it?
Mm.
So the use of technology and data around collecting weather conditions, soil conditions, the analytics of that, the understanding of how to model using AI, which is just starting to become an emergent method in farming, the use of sensors in different regions to be able to identify whether you have the right penetration of water and nutrients. If you're not doing that, you may as well go to a casino.
Well, that's right. It's just throwing the dice.
Yeah.
You've got to understand. So there's a lot of really good technology out there now, sort of going right from the start, from the planning phase to the marketing phase,
Yep.
and whatever's in between. So in between, you've got nutrient delivery, water delivery. If you're in dry land, you've got rainfall, but you've still got nutrient delivery. So you've got to be able to understand that, and you've got to understand the whole cost process as you go, because you can throw it out willy-nilly, and at the end you've got no money.
And I think people, I know farmers don't forget, but I think we forget, as someone who goes and buys an avocado, for instance, actually what is the cost of production? It's not just the soil. So it's nutrient. It can be water in an irrigation-based area. There's a whole lot of costs that go into producing it. And yet the marginal return for Australian farmers on the domestic market is incredibly low, isn't it?
That is very low.
The only market that's going to make them money, and we'll talk about this more later, is overseas. But if you've got to put nutrients in, if you've got to put water in, and we'll talk about the cost of water also later, you can become unviable very fast, can't you?
Doesn't take long, and you've got to keep tabs of that. And the systems are in process now, and the technology's there that you can. So from a daily perspective, you know exactly where you are, because you know where you want to end up,
Yep.
and you know where you started from. So you've got to keep those costs under control, because the numbers are pretty simple. You know what your output is at the end.
Yep.
And I'll take cotton as an example. So if you use 12 bales, you're going to average about $550 a bale. So there's your total. That's your value. And you've got to keep under that. And most of the times you want a margin out of that.
Yep.
So you've got to keep an eye on your costs. And
it's funny, isn't it? As a young man, when I was 16, I did jackarooing up in the Riverina area and running around there, and there was no technology. Okay, the dog was the technology, basically. And yet when I walk on the major farms now, I'm surprised by how low the headcount is. So how few people are actually employed in the farm, how little manual work is now done compared to what used to be done. And just the level of knowledge and awareness as to the state of ripeness of fruit, all the issues that are critical for farmers are now governed by sensors and data. And if you're not in it, if you haven't made that capital investment, it is chance, isn't it?
It is chance. And I'll give you one live example. As for tomatoes, for example, it was costing us around $10,000 a hectare. This is an annual crop.
Yeah.
And you think in perspective that a wheat crop is about $800 in cost.
Yep.
So tomatoes 10, so there's a lot of money going out. And the best you're going to do is probably, if you got 13 back, you've had a really good year. But you've got so much technology out there, and they're all on different platforms.
Yeah.
And it took us ages to work out, to get a platform where it was all on one screen. So it just came up on one screen with all the different things: moisture, where we are actual to budget, temperature, what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks weather-wise, all on one screen. So once we found that sort of technology, or the people doing it, it gave us a real good idea of where we were and where we're going to be.
Yeah. So look, I guess I just want to put it out there is, I think we're in this stage of enormous change with technology, and the actual capacity, the predictive capacities of AI to actually mirror what your farm's going to look like days ahead, weeks ahead, months ahead, is fantastic stuff to have. But in farming life at the moment, you just can't wing it.
No, there's no way you can wing it. And a live example of that is, so in an orchard, for example, once you start flowering, whether you're growing almonds, avocados, or citrus, you want to know what your potential yield is.
Yep.
But there's so many things against you weather-wise: heat, cold. So there's LiDAR technology that you can run down your orchard now, and it gives you, at flowering, how many flowers you've got. So what you can preempt to what you're going to produce.
Yep.
And then you do that a couple of times during the growing season. And then when you get to the production, to the money end, and you're picking fruit, you actually know, because you've got to be able to market on the other side. You can go out and market, but if you don't produce, all of a sudden you've lost faith.
And can I just say, let's just use olives as an example. So it's going to be a terrible year in the northern hemisphere for olives, and probably not so good over in South America way where they're grown. So the market that you're actually entering into is not an Australian market.
No.
So you had a fantastic year with your olives here, but just say they've had a fantastic year with their olives in Spain. The value of your olives just went. So we'll come back to diversification as an issue, because I think it is a really important issue. But what data tells you and information tells you is, do I need to diversify? What is my likely price at the time of picking and sale in a global and local market? How am I going to control my overheads? How am I going to offset or mediate the weather conditions with the massive variability we're seeing with climate change coming through? All those things are part of a large network of risk that sits around you as a farmer. And there is so much data crystallized that can give you a bit of a deeper understanding. But without that data, you are stuffed.
Because I think, and you go back to the market.
Yep.
You've got to go out there well before you've picked that fruit, for example, or the olives. Olives are probably a different example because there's two streams to that.
Yeah.
But say, for example, for avocados, you've got to book into markets, whether it's domestic or overseas. There's a lot of things that got to happen before you've picked that crop.
Yep.
So that's where that LiDAR technology gives you an idea of what's going instead of guessing.
So this is the future market.
This is the future market.
Yeah.
So because if you get to that point and all of a sudden you've got double what you expected to put into the market, you're going to halve the price.
Yeah.
Understand? So but if you've marketed exactly what you think, or round about within 10%, at least you've got a shot at getting at premium prices.
Yeah. Fascinating, isn't it? All right, Michael, we're going to talk about carbon credits. Now, my reading on this, and I'm not a fool, but it's hard work. What is carbon capture in soil? So what we know is that for every ton of carbon abated within the soil, you get a credit. But on pastures, it's not easy, is it, to actually enrich the nitrogen in soil and grow that value?
No, and it never has been.
Yeah.
Minimum till in dryland cropping has helped us with those sorts of things. But to advance 0.1% in organic carbon in the soil can take a lifetime.
Yeah.
So there's different forms of agriculture that put, people are using regenerative agriculture with different varieties. Some are winter varieties, legume fixing plants to help that, but you've still got a long way to go. Soil carbon is hard work.
And I guess that's one of the things we should stop and talk about, really, isn't it? And if you're going to get into this market, size is critical, because you're not going to get anything from a small farm.
No.
Secondly, you're in there for a minimum of 25 years on the first carbon credit scheme, up to 100 years. So there's a whole lot of things about succession, buy-sell agreements that you're going to enter into around warranties that someone is going to follow through in this pathway. But you don't get anything for 5 to 7 years.
No.
Nothing at all. So it is, and then when you want to do testing, so let's use a 3,000 hectare farm, you're paying $200,000 to $300,000 to do the soil testing to demonstrate it for a couple of occasions during that 7-year time. You've got to make a lot of money to get there, haven't you?
Yeah, and technology will take over from that eventually. Yeah. I don't think it's there yet, but CSIRO are doing a lot of really good things on that that'll help us in the future. But it's time, and time's money.
So Mike, talk about your experience, because you've been doing this recently up the north, haven't you?
Yeah, well, we've been looking at cattle stations and carbon credits, going in there and changing management practices. So doing a lot of detailed paperwork for governments and the Clean Energy Regulator, and it's not easy. And that's the stuff that we were doing was very modelled by the Clean Energy Regulator,
Yep.
so you can't muck with it.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, there's a lot of auditing. You've got to have ecologists out in the field a couple of times a year, and it's just doesn't happen overnight. And then you've got to change management practices to suit that program that you're in.
So look, let's walk sideways a little bit because it sounds good. I could make some money on some carbon credits. Got to wait a while. Bit of a big investment in capital, but I'm going to make it. But then the processors are sitting there and saying, oh, we're going to get thumped because we use carbon excessively. So we're going to actually take whatever costs us and put it back because we're not going to be able to sell at a higher price. So we're going to put it back on the farm by reducing prices that are purchased. And the farmers are going to go, well, I could fix this by just handing over a few carbon credits. And that's exactly what the processors are hoping. So this is a game of strategy, isn't it? Because you don't want to be giving away those carbon credits because that's real money in your hand.
And as we talked about earlier, there's a lot of consultants come up into this field.
Oh, there's a lot, isn't there?
And they want to share that as well. And I think the farmers that I talk to and the businesses that I've been involved in, everybody's playing it very cautiously. They're going to keep hold of their carbon credits themselves, because they realise that in the future they're going to have to trade them to be able to trade in their current business. So
and it will form part of their return on capital, won't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. So. I guess as we look at what makes money for a farm, we know what the costs are because we've started talking about costs. And whatever you produce, you're going to sell, but in a market in the next 10 years for which there will be incredible demand, but the level of wealth that sits in the world won't be quite as high. So the actual ability to sell at a very high price, maybe in 20 years, is not there. So what will kick that up a little bit? Carbon credits.
Yeah.
So it's going to become a critical part of large farming, isn't it?
Oh, it is. But it's understanding the various enterprises you've got within a farm.
Yeah.
That's just another enterprise and should be treated as such.
Yeah.
That you can value add to your farm, and value add to your other enterprises by that one.
It's interesting as we're going here, there's a lot, isn't there, as a farm? So there's the historical practice of growing or developing whatever you've got on your land. There's understanding financially investment in capital, return on capital and technology. Okay, so technology is like an enterprise in itself, isn't it? There is the financial acumen that sits around that, which is greater than you've ever required before to get down into the detail to know what your return is. There's a trading arm to a business because you're now selling into a futures market directly, whereas you were once just selling to a corporatized group who'd go, 10 farmers would be together in a cooperative and they'd just sell. It'd be easy. Whereas
you're price takers.
Yeah.
It exists now to be a price maker.
Yeah.
But you have to do it smart.
Yeah.
And set up these systems.
Then you've got the carbon part, and then I guess what we're coming to next is water, isn't it? Now, Michael, we're using about 9 million megalitres for farming. I don't know what that is. That's a lot of water. It's more than the swimming pool. We're using more every year. Technology, where it's being used, maximises the usage of that. But if we look at the Murray-Darling area, gee, I tell you what, the prices are pretty wild, aren't they? So 2023, mean of about $80 per megalitre, went up to about 200. It was when was it in 2000? It was up to $800 a meg.
At the end of the millennial drought, it got up to $800 for allocation price.
So let's tell me for a wheat farmer, $80 a megalitre if you've got to irrigate.
Yeah, so that's an irrigated wheat farmer.
Yeah.
So once you get past 80, but rice is the same.
Yeah.
Corn's the same.
Yeah.
Those commodities that are international commodities that run an international commodity price, you run out of puff after about $80 because not only have you've got water as an input, and so if you said 80 you use about five megs.
Yeah.
So in a summer crop, on average, so 5 by 80, there's an extra. What's that?
400 RWE.
Yeah, on top of what you're already spending, which is probably about 800. Go back to those simple sums. Know what you can produce on average. I don't want the good and I don't want the ugly.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you know what it's going to cost you, so you know you break even and when to get out.
Well, look, use a walnut farm. It gets up to 200 and it's wiped out.
Yeah.
Now that's the best return you're ever going to get, isn't it?
So it's up. Then it becomes water's another enterprise.
Yeah.
And the farmers that use it like that, and there's plenty that do. They get to a point that they won't plant once they know they can sell the water, because you can sell the water and go on holidays, and still be earning a quid. So it's utilising that commodity, which that's exactly what water is now, that we didn't have before.
And the clever farmers are doing both, aren't they? So they are utilising water through high use of technology, not just in the distribution of water through drip irrigation, but in through understanding weather conditions, having the data that tells you when to irrigate, when not to irrigate, but also selling the water.
Yeah, that's right. And a lot of corporatized water's become a corporate minefield as well. So there's a lot of corporate entities that own water and trade water now.
Yeah.
So that's something that didn't exist 15 years ago.
And this was part of your early life, wasn't it? Was this, when we talked about the tomatoes earlier, you not only grew the tomatoes in the salinated soil, rehabilitated the soil, but you also sold water as part of it.
Yeah, we did. But then you had to be very mindful, because I knew what the cost of water was. And I used to look at it in 10-year averages. It used to make me feel better. But on a given day, we weren't making money if water was at $800. There was just no way you could.
Yeah.
And you're breaking even at 500.
Yeah.
But yeah, 350. That's where it's. I think I've forgotten how many times it got to that point. And that's where you can get long-term leases at 350. Yeah. You've really got to get production.
Yeah.
Because it's gold.
Yeah. Well, look, we're going to, over the next 6 or 7 months, Michael and I are going to break down a lot more about this sort of stuff and go into detail and give examples. But what I want you to draw from this is farming now has different general managers, doesn't it? And like all businesses, there's people who are very good financially, there's people who are very good with technology, there's people who are very good at actually farming itself, just the principal practice of farming. But it's a lot to ask an individual to do all this, isn't it?
No, it is. And that's, well, there's a lot of farms now are corporatising. Family farms are corporatising themselves.
Yeah.
And getting bigger with scale.
Yeah.
But that means that they've got to be like a corporate and responsible for what they're doing.
And as difficult as this message is, from my point of view, scale is everything, isn't it? And for Australia, we've seen a dramatic reduction in individual farming. We lose about 8% of our individual farmers every year. So that's a finite sort of process in the end. But we are seeing gradually the collectivity of corporate farms growing, because the discussions that Michael and I have just had with you just suggest it's really hard. It's my business is pretty easy. I've got a group of lawyers out there. They do a level of production. They have high levels of technical expertise. I can sit them next to each other with different levels of expertise, but at the end of the day, they record their production and we charge at a rate. We do have a bit of a market adjustment that goes on, but it's a pretty straightforward business. Farming is much more complex. But if you ask a city slicker, what's farming like? They'd go, pretty easy. Just stick the bit of wheat in your mouth and wander off into the distance. Whereas in fact, farming is by far one of the more complex and sophisticated business that's being run now.
Oh, it is, and getting more complex. The cost of labour, and as you pointed out, we're losing farmers.
Yeah.
We're losing people in the regions. So automation's a big thing, and you've got to understand that. And recently I was in an orchard in Mildura, and we were looking at this automated system called Gus, which goes up and down, comes from America. And I'm thinking, well, that's great, but I'm going to replace 4 people with one really smart person, and he's going to cost me the same anyway. And then I was relieved to find out that these systems are now designed by people that actually use them. So it's not any general person can run these systems. And you run them in groups of 4, for example. So that's 4 labour units, plus there's other labour units to keep them up. So it's a fine balance.
Well, that's a good segue, isn't it? So we've talked about that orchard, and orchards are, about 80% of what orchards produce go overseas. They don't stay here, and the premium fruit doesn't stay in Australia. Mostly it goes overseas. Sustainability is a key factor, isn't it, in selling to overseas? So when we talk about it here, sustainability of the business, that's one thing. As you say, sustainability is profit. Without it, you're dead. But when you're going to a foreign market, and particularly Asia, what you are selling is green credentials, aren't you?
Yeah, because you're going into premium markets. So if you're going into so you're selling to a customer who knows. You're not just selling into any market.
So this is not a commodity. This is actual. This is your farm, your brand. You're selling, and people are going, I'm buying Michael's avocado.
And we did this a while back with Queen Garnet plums. You want to get that box. So you want your brand on that box, and you want to know where it's from. So you want to get that into a market. So people, I've heard of cases, if they don't know the brand, they'll lift the lid off. They'll chuck half of it. So you lose that straight away, and they'll take the other half at a premium price. But you're back to 50% of what you originally put in. What you need to do is get a trusted brand that they know. So you're feeding them information all the time about the growing season, about what you do. They know the compliance around growing those crops to get them overseas. So a lot of that's sort of ticked, but they want to know that they want to be in the paddock. Now, and technology now, we can show them the whole growing season. We can show them at flowering and everything.
Can I say, overseas chefs, it is amazing to see what overseas chefs, particularly in Asia, doing. So we looked at the Hilton in Singapore. They bought whole animals, I think it was from Cape Grim, to prove sustainability of the chef, of being able to use every part of the animal, but also to be able to track where the animal had been. And they advertised the producer. They said, this is as good as meat gets, this is the meat we're getting, and this is what we're producing for you. Enormous success. We've got to understand it's a much more sophisticated market than the premium market, and that means you've got to be able to tell your story from the moment the seed goes in or the animal is born to the time at which it's delivered to them.
That's right, and they want to know that whole story, and they want to be part of that. So once you get those customers and you get them to know your story and trust your brand, they're with you forever. But don't ever try to de-sell it, like as in don't send bad quality there, because you'll be dropped quickly. But if you keep that up, you've got.
How do you do that though? I'm a farmer. I've got a 4,000 hectare farm. It's productive. It's vibrant. But how do I build the relationships in Asia with the right people? How do I know to do that?
Well, I just recently went to India, and we went through Austrade.
Yeah.
But we've got one person in our business, and our brand's called Harvester, that we went in and this Josh knew exactly what he was doing, how to sell that brand to supermarkets, to individuals, to groups, and then we've got to get their trust. So that takes the next 18 months, 2 years, which we've sort of gone down that path, and Thailand's another market. They've got to trust you, and they've got to trust that the quality that goes into that 20-foot container or that 1-ton container that goes on the plane. But when it gets there, it's in pristine nick and ready to eat.
I think that's part of it, isn't it? Because Australia has really been failed by its government in identifying what is sustainable farming. Australia does have a green brand, but it's by happenstance. It's not something that the government has deliberately done. But we need, if anyone from government's listening today, we need measures of sustainability so that we can actually say, look, we meet our government benchmark, and that should be a high benchmark. So we're not individually always trying to create the story of being a green brand. We are by nature a green brand, and I think it's a real problem for Australia.
Yeah, and we're not good at selling ourselves. Australians never have that. So you've actually got to change your mindset. And remember, I've been from down on the farm, muddy boots, to that marketing side. You have to change your mindset about how you interact with people. And one thing that I did neglect to say at the beginning when I was introducing myself, my rhetoric around this whole business of farming, and particularly in corporate farming and family farming, be the same. So it's people, relationships, respect, trust. Those 4 things are critical to the whole business, and any business, not only agriculture. But one of those things falls over, the whole lot falls over. So that those 4 things to me are critical for all of the process, whether you're working with farm staff down here or selling in markets up here.
And I guess when you're going into a premium market, they're even more important, aren't they? Because what you're really asking someone is to pay above the norm for a product, and you're saying that product has all these credentials. You've got to be able to prove each one, and they've got to be able to look in and see that everything you say is true. So there has to be this transparency, doesn't there?
And that first bite will tell them
if it's true.
Yeah, if it's true.
So it's sort of fun, isn't it? I mean, it's lovely to have someone virtually down on the farm, if that makes sense. If your clients actually see themselves as being on the farm, you've created these amazing intimacies in relationships. So in law, for instance, relationships are everything. We attend everyone's business. We deliberately are out there. Why do we do it? So we know the industry, we know the people, we know the capacity, we know what outcome looks for them, what is success. And if we're not doing that, we're sitting behind our desk on a computer, which you can see I'm not skilled at anyway, we actually miss everything the client needs. But for a farmer to sell a unit of something, it looks like every other unit until it's eaten, bitten. To say, look, you should buy this. You should buy it because it's been grown in a way which is sustainable and green. It's done no damage. It's a farm that sells its carbon credits because it's such a rich soil, the way that to sell every aspect, we use water wisely. I could go on and on saying things. In Asia, that really, really matters. It's those behaviours that drive someone to say, I want to buy that. Whereas just having a T-bone doesn't cut it. That's a supermarket.
Yeah, that's right. So it's all about the brand, whether it's beef, whatever.
Yep.
And you know you can go back to that brand and trust it and rely on it for
Yep.
the taste and the expectation you've put on it. That makes it. And like I said, don't break that trust, because as soon as you break it once, you don't get a second chance.
Well, Michael, it's not easy, is it? We've talked about this. We've talked about the analytics, the technology, the exposure. We're a net exporter. I guess one of the things that occurs to me is I grew up in the Ballarat region. I went around with my dad, who was an optometrist, who used to set up in hotels in the back room of a hotel. People would go and get their glasses made by Dad. But everywhere I went was a monoculture. So you go to some places and it was clearly lambs or wool, or it was beef. But they were monocultures. There was wheat farms. Everything was a wheat farm wherever you went. It's not what we can do now, is it? I mean, there can be some singularly successful farms that's brand is so strong on just one thing. You can do that. But if you don't have diversification, particularly in cereal cropping and things like that, you're in a real bit of trouble as the market changes, aren't you?
That's right. And and diversification's been a big thing in Australia for a long time. Like, you've got cattle stations that they've sort of, you can't do anything else up there. But down south, if you talk about Victoria and the Wimmera, for example, a lot of guys have gone 100% cropping.
Yeah.
Now you can have diversification by variety
Yeah.
and different types of cropping. But some of the, I think if you go through the long-term benchmark numbers, it's the mixed farmer who's got a bit of sheep, does a bit of cropping, but as long as one doesn't compromise the other. So it's a fine balance.
Yeah.
Now you can have diversification, but you need balance.
Yeah.
So, and that was always a challenge.
But it is, as I understand, one of the difficulties is if you're predicting what your market's going to be, so you're deciding what you're going to plant next year, part of it has to be you've got to know what commodity prices are going to be overseas in a predictive manner to go, well, I normally do this, but I can make a lot more out of this. Maybe I should go. Is that how it works?
No, not really. So really, your expertise, we talked about the expertise to survive. You can't swap. And once you've set your path, you're really into it. But forward marketing, you've got swaps at banks and everything else. So you can set up a good structure. And for cotton, for example, I thought that was a great industry when I was involved in it, because you could forward sell 3 years in advance. So once you found a good price level, you could lock that in. But you had to have the production to back it up, because if you didn't, so you still had to pay up. So at the end of the day, your risk is high if you don't produce. But if you're continually producing and you're good at what you do, and I think you'll find a lot of advisors are saying farmers are good at farming, but they get a marketing expert to help them with their markets. So in dryland farming, you need that. Horticulture is different, and annual vegetable cropping is different, because it's so short. But at the end of the day, that's where you lock in your brand with horticulture. But there's no international markets on that. There's no way you can lock that in, for example. But
so what is the role of diversification? And so where does it play out? So I gave an example of a sort of fool's guide diversification. No, you've got to be an expert. Don't try and be a master of all. And you've got to actually have skill. Where do you use diversification based on your knowledge of where the market is going to go?
Well, really, so if you've got diversification within a farm unit, and just say that covers mostly dryland stuff, so we're talking sheep, livestock, and cropping. So the diversification gives you balance. So at the end of the day, climate might play against you. Dry seasons, dry finish. You've still got livestock here as a balance. So it's about return on capital, and it's about total revenues. So at least the sheep are still ticking over, even though you've made a loss on your cropping or broken even.
Whereas a large corporate farmer may have farms in different places.
Geographical.
Based on their expertise and the climate and soil in that area. And soil is king, isn't it? I should say that.
Soil is king. But for example, in citrus farming, it's so critical. In the areas where they grow up in Queensland, we're involved in one around Gayndah, and it's a really high hail risk area. And you can have this wonderful crop that you've set up and got markets forward, and get wiped out by hail. You get a third of what you predicted. And that takes a lot to come back because you've spent the money.
Yeah.
In cropping systems nowadays, with the technology that they've got and the application of fertilizers, etc., you can just add fertilizers as you go. Whereas 30 years ago, they used to put it all up front,
Yeah.
and used to take it what it was. It didn't matter what the season did. Here, we understand the plant. There's some really good research and development going on in agriculture. There's some really good DCs, whether it's the GRDC, the cotton DCs. Horticulture have some really good research and development corporations behind them. So you understand the production of how that crop grows and when it needs that nutrient. So you don't have to put it all up front.
Yep.
So there's a bit of balance there as well about how you do that business.
Okay, we've got all the balance. We've looked at diversification. You've knocked me around on that. I haven't gone so well. I'm bleeding after the second round. Talk to me a bit about foreign trade and what do farmers need to know about foreign trade, and how do they gain assistance to actually build that individual market?
Well, there's some very good organisations that are involved in trade overseas. You've got to remember the risk is high. So we're not only talking about growing risk, which you've already got behind you. Once it leaves the pack shed,
yeah,
or leaves the farm, there's a basis risk in cropping, for example. And that's either a plus or a negative in the business because of what's happening locally as compared to overseas. Once you're dealing in horticulture, you've got to get it to a port or to an airport to get it overseas. And then you're dealing in currency because you're going into American dollars usually. So there's that risk. Once it leaves Australia, it leaves your hands. It's out of your control if it's on a ship. So there's a lot of risk. And I always thought that these guys are making a lot of money at the other end, but they are also taking a lot of risk. And you've got to remember what happens when you go into some of the Asian ports. There's a lot of money goes out the back door just to get things to happen. We're not used to that sort of thing in Australia. We've got reliability in our markets locally that things just happen.
Yeah.
And whereas once you get overseas, you haven't got that reliability. So there's all sorts of risks. So you've got to be prepared to take those risks. And then there's a lot of competition in the market.
So just stop there for a second. How do I learn that? How do I learn? So you've given me 6 risks, 3 of which I had no idea of, all within a minute. When a farmer's looking at doing this, how do you get them to sit down and go, okay, here's your base figure. We'll say it's $500 a tonne, whatever it is. I'm making the number up. It's $350 to actually build it. Okay, so you've got $150 in margin, but if you go to Asia, you get $1,000 a tonne. Now, here are the 6 risks, and this is how they're going to play out in true cost over a period of 5 years. Who does that with a farmer? Who sits down and does that?
Well, there's certain organisations that do, but most farmers don't.
Yeah.
Because it's too big a risk. They don't understand it.
Yeah.
Once it leaves their hands, they'd rather have the money in their pocket and move on. And I don't blame them one bit.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of farmers that are selling legumes into India, for example, and into Asia, and taking that risk themselves. And that's fine, but that they understand the risk. To enter into these things and not understand it, and I've only mentioned half of them.
Yeah.
Because you've got delivery risk as well.
Yeah.
Because once you've locked in a market and you can't deliver, people want payback on that.
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of things, and you can understand why a farmer just wants to, as soon as it leaves the farm, they want to get paid.
So will there be a time like in the 70s and 80s where farmers come together in cooperatives and start to explore markets? It was huge in the 70s. Potato crop, everything.
Single desk.
Yeah.
Which is that was fine. I rather like the challenge of what's going on at the moment. I think that's better than cooperatives.
Yep.
Cooperatives sound good, but to get a group of farmers together and then somebody who's not who's a little bit smarter than the others, he can find a price, so he pulls out, and then the whole thing. They've never worked in Australia. They fall over very quickly.
So what is happening now? If we look at right this moment, what are the opportunities that sit there for farmers in foreign trade?
Well, I think there's some really good businesses out there that are taking a lot of those risks on for people.
Yeah.
They see farmers, and I've always been one of them as well. Farmers see the gap, and they think, that's a bit greedy. But once they start to understand the risks and really look after your own farm, look after your own enterprises and business, and don't take on those risks because they are heavy risks.
Yeah.
Now you can take. I'm not saying don't take them on, but just fully understand the risks on the other side.
So, spoken a lot today. I guess for someone who's not a farmer but grew up in the country, my mind's a bit swimming everywhere. There's a lot of things happening. I've got a lot of balls in the air. I'm 60 years old. That's the average age of a owner farmer in Australia at the moment. I'm looking at my 2 sons and 3 daughters and going, shit, who is going to take this on in the future? And it's probably the one son. The other one's trained as a dentist and has gone into town, and daughters have left. One's a pharmacist, 2 are nurses. I've got this one son. But Michael, you've given me 20 risks that I've got to manage.
Mm.
I've got a farm which I've easily borrowed against because it's easy to borrow against capital, but in cash terms, I'm lean. I now know I'm behind the ball in technology, and I've got to get there. I know I'm behind the ball in dealing with foreign markets. I don't even understand that. And I've just had a chat with a group of guys around me, and we've worked out how to use the water market locally and share the cost. But I had no idea how expensive that would be. Even the infrastructure, I had no idea how expensive. And I'm wondering, what am I going to do and how am I going to manage this? And now you're telling me about carbon credits. God, what am I going to do with those? And my son, he's not university educated. He likes doing what I do, which is wandering around and poking the odd sheep. What am I going to do with succession?
Well, I'm not from a family. I am from a family farm, but succession wasn't well done in our family, so I moved away from that. That's why I got into corporate. So I'm probably not the best person to ask.
You are the best person to ask for that reason.
so one, I think the first thing that's come up, the capital cost of land has gone up incredibly in the last 15 years, and now we're saying quadrupled from that point. So now you've got the 2 that aren't on the farm looking at it, well, hang on, I want a slice of that as well, even though they're not farming.
Yeah.
So that makes it incredibly hard. And I've got some friends in this situation that they've either got to borrow a lot of money and pay their sisters out or their brothers, but they've got to do that on current pricing, not when they're not.
And can I just say on pricing, which is not going to grow the same way again?
No, I think we've seen. I could be wrong, but I think we've seen the boom.
Yeah.
But that'll come back again. If you look at overseas markets, now Australia's still pretty well priced. That's why the corporates, the Canadians, the Americans, the Europeans are coming in and buying land in Australia. They see it as well priced compared to those areas.
Yeah.
But I think the succession thing is, there's a lot of balls to juggle. And what do you want to hand on? Hand on to your son or your family or your daughter. There's a lot of daughters coming back now, which is great.
Typically, succession was something that we talked about. When I first started as a lawyer, I used to go to Scottsdale in Tassie. I was the partner. I used to go out there every Thursday. I used to talk simply to farmers, say, look, right on the back of everything with a sticker, who gets what. What I was trying to do was to create clarity for people about what it was. And the farms were mostly wealthy and successful farmers, very rich area in Tassie. But the disputes were shocking. And the disputes were shocking for a lot of reasons. Like the dads used to collect the sons at the end of where they walked to the school bus and bring them back to work on the farm, and then would come and collect them and bring them home, and the kids would pretend they went to school and their mum would know nothing about it. All sorts of stuff. These kids had worked for nothing because the capital value they thought they were getting. But let's be candid, farming is about capital and return on capital. And the method of getting that, we've just spent 40 or 50 minutes talking about how to get that. It's complex. So you can't talk about it as something you hold in trust for family, because if they can't manage it, it's a dead asset.
That's right. And it's a wasted asset.
And the other part is you've borrowed like buggery on it, on the growth of the capital value of land. But that's not returnable, because you don't make lots of money cash on a farm. It's not an easy thing to make money. You can if you invest in technology. You can if you invest in carbon credits. You can if you invest in wise water use. But the way you make money now is through diverse heads of money making. It's not just on selling a crop. So I guess the reason I'm raising it with you is, for our clients, it's a constant issue of who will take the farm and how I compensate the ones who don't. But I guess it's not that easy anymore, is it? Because the person who takes the farm now has to be competent.
Yeah, that's right. And there's a lot riding on it. And there's still, like you say, banks always want their money back. They never want to leave it out there forever. And the family who are not involved in the farm want their money. So at the end of the day, very complex. You've got to be able to take that on. And the guy, whoever's taking the farm on, has to be competent, like you said. and they've got to have that ability to get a return on capital. And we're not talking just 1 or 2%. To stay, if you're borrowing money at 8%, you've at least got to try and earn that back.
Yeah. And look, I guess the last part of this is farming is an enterprise which is built on soil, climate. It's a fragile beast when you deal with it. So when you're looking at succession, you're not looking at a 2 or 3 year business plan like you are in a law business, okay? You're looking at a 15 to 20 year business plan where your investment gets returns over. So we're going to invest in technology, and technology is always moving. I've actually got to look at what is the return on investment for that technology. And that's going to be over a 5 to 10 year. You're going to get a buyback after 3 years, but you're not going to get a buyback in 18 months. If I look at all the other things, every investment in farming, every bit of infrastructure has a slow buyback. So the business plan that you are selling to your son is not a 3 year plan. It's not, oh, good luck, mate. It is a very deliberate process of saying over the next 20 years, for this to succeed, these are the investments we will have to make. And if we don't make them, the farm's not going to make any money. So we need to actually plan events. Can you do this? Is what you want to do, or do we sell the farm?
Yeah, you've got to take the emotion out of it.
Yeah.
And that's very hard for farmers that have been there 2 or 3 generations.
And look, let's take a 2-second break. Just for the last bit, we'll do a very short bit on the future of foreign markets. Okay. 1, 2. All right, we've gone through everything. We're going to come back and do each one in bits and pieces. But I guess we started our discussion by saying Australians are net exporters, and that's going to continue. Australia's growth is relatively small compared to population growths around the world. We're going to be definitely selling more than 50% of whatever we produce. And that market will become increasingly volatile as climate change hits it, particularly in Northern Europe and in Asia. So what do people need to know in brief about their exposure to a foreign market? They're looking at their 20-year plan. They're sitting down with their sons and daughters. They're saying, succession looks like this, but understand that your primary purchaser lives overseas. What are the first couple of things I just got to get in my mind about that if I want to succeed as a farmer? Knowing that I'm exposed to a foreign market, it's volatile, it's a huge market, it has competitors. Unlike Australia, you've only got local competitors, there's massive competition. What am I going to be saying in that 20-year plan with my family about our farm?
Well, I think you go back to what I said originally about the people, relationships, respect, trust. You've got to build a long-term plan with people. You can't swap and change with who you deal with.
Yep.
You've got to get somebody who's successful in that overseas trade and stick with them through the highs and through the lows. So you've got recognition at the other end. Because if you keep swapping brands or people, nobody knows who you are or where you're from. So longevity is a good start, I think, that relationship that you've built up. And you've got to remember, you're still going to get challenged from other countries. So one thing that stuck out when I was in India was, I believed India was a huge market, which it is. Nobody can say it's not. So there's 1.4 billion people and growing. But only 50 million of those people are on Western or equivalent wages. So there's no money. I've never seen poverty like that.
Yeah.
So that they're not affording the stuff that we're doing. But that 50 million, they are developing e-commerce markets over there now, where you can ring up or put an order in on a computer and it's delivered to your door in 10 minutes. So there's all sorts of different, and we will talk about that more in the marketing in one of the next segments, but those sorts of things are happening. So you've got to know that they're happening. And then that goes back to the quality of that produce that you're producing and a lot, the shelf life and the longevity of it.
Yeah, interesting. I played high level sport as a young guy, and one of the things that one of my coaches said is, look, I think it was Vince DiMaggio who said it, is, practice perfection, you'll get excellence. But he said, every day you practice a mistake, that mistake will be exhibited in what you do at another time. And for Australian farmers, they want to get in this market, they have to have the best produce. Mm. The way to maximise return.
And you've got to start with that. Yeah. Unfortunately, in those markets, you can't have one mistake.
Yeah.
Because you're remembered for a long time on that one mistake.
Yeah. So I think
the excellence has got to start from day one.
And that doesn't matter whether it's a commodity or a product. Does that make sense?
Exactly.
It's the same. All right, mate. Well, look, great to have you along. Michael's brought along 50 slides for about the next 50 months. So what we're going to try and do over the next year or so with Michael is actually break down each subject and really drill down and give you examples of it so you can go, so I get that. So if I need to do this, this is what I do. And we'll sort of come up with some help lists along the way, things I should think about. Mike, great to have you along.
Thank you, Andrew.
And thanks everyone for listening. See you later. Bye-bye.